Welcome to the Piral Community Stand-up. This time, I would say a mixture of topics. To get right into it, let's first have a look at what happened since the last community stand-up. We were talking about releasing the 0.12 version, and yeah, of course, we released it since then. So as you know, the 0.12 is what was originally planned as the 1.0, but as explained last time, we are shifting plans a bit, mostly due to the React 17 release that is upcoming, but also due to some other minor things we wanted to take care of before the 1.0. So the 0.12 is more or less what would have been in the 1.0 and what is, of course, part of the 1.0. Most notably, we polished the API of Piral instance a bit and fixed a lot of bugs and issues with the Piral CLI Webpack integration. Other than that, I think there are no surprises there. There is also a little bit of cleanup regarding documentation. There's more cleanup to come, but I think so far this is already a great success. And if we look at the 1.0 and what's now planned there, we put out some more issues and stories for that. Most importantly, as mentioned, React 17, but also some of the other cleanups and yeah, little cosmetic enhancements, things like enhancements for the documentation, enhancements for the ecosystem, but also if you can see, we are not stopping at the internals. We will support a new mode that I will want to demo next time, which I think will be quite cool, but requires quite a sophisticated mode on the feed services side. So the service that ships the pilets in the end, which is what we will call bundle script. Again, more on that next time, but I think it's quite something neat. And the story goes already in a little bit in details, what we are thinking here. And yeah, I guess a demo there would certainly help. And we'll also show where this new mode can shine and what it can provide. All right, so that's the current stand. We are at this point in time, I think more and more gearing up towards the 1.0. I'm not sure if there will be a 0.12.1. Potentially there will be, but just with minor things. Yeah, whenever we detect something that needs to be fixed, we will do that. All right, so then the first thing I wanted to show is enhancements to the feed service that are up and coming. Well, the first thing here is that we already started making improvements for the rules that you can add. That was already, of course, fully capable in the API space, but so far in the UI, in our little portal that we have here, not so much. But now we have a fully capable JSON editor here that even brings you some more or less graphical enhancements. And the most important thing is that you get really a much better inline validation. So only types that are really supported will now be recognized as such. Otherwise, you will get validation errors and you cannot add such rules. So there is no chance of pushing something to the API, then it gets rejected, and then you don't know exactly what the mistake was. You can always now see that in the user interface, which is quite nice. The other cool thing about the latest version of the publicly available feed service is that it brings support for ES modules. So that's a System.js related topic. But in short, it allows you to actually not only have the metadata response that we see here, which is the one that is mostly expected from Piral. I mean, with rich metadata information, like what are all the microfrontends you want to include. But you can have an import map for this too. And this follows the specification from the from the working group at the Web Specification Consortium. And what you get there is their latest spec. And so it just is an object that has one key called imports. And then each micro frontend is actually in a key value manner labeled. So we have, for instance, here the 3 micro frontends: Team Blue, Team Green, and Team Red. And this isn't containing the rich media information, but only, you know, the name as a key and the link to the entry module as the value. And that's it. But that follows exactly the import maps specification. And therefore, it could be used not only in Piral, that is, of course, one potential use case, but you could use it with any micro front-end solution that is using System.js. So that includes, for instance, single spar, but any other solution that is based on System.js also works in this fashion. And as a matter of fact, you could even use that for any kind of application that uses System.js for dynamically shipping some dependencies, which I think is quite neat, especially because still, if you apply rules to these micro frontends, then you still can dynamically, so per request, determine what kind of modules are shipped here. So all in all, I think the best of both worlds, and yeah, very, very easy to get. You get it for free when you create a new feed. All you need to do is essentially just replace pilot by import map, and there you go. Okay, cool. Then next thing I wanted to show is converters, quite interesting topic. Let me just make this a little bit larger, but if you have any questions so far, always just feel free to interrupt. Otherwise, I assume it's all cool. So here I created a pilot, and the pilot was actually created for our sample Piral instance. So this is the command I was using. I just initialized a new pilot. I said, oh yeah, let's create this for the sample Piral instance that we have out there. And as a bundler, let's just use Webpack. And that's it. That's all I did. But if you can remember, so this is how our demo looks like. If you know the code of this demo, it pretty much is only focused on React. So it doesn't ship with any converters or anything for some other front-end framework. And while, of course, Piral supports using whatever you want to, for convenience, you may want to add these converters to your Piral instance. But that, of course, yeah, brings you in a kind of odd situation, because how should the app shell ever know what kind of frameworks now a specific pilot wants to use, right? So you're now author of a pilot and you want to say, okay, I love this new front-end framework called Svelte and I want to use it. So do you need now to go to the author of the app shell and say, yeah, please support that, please add the converter? Well, that's of course not an ideal way to solve this issue. And while you could recreate that converter, or let's say the way to introduce now, in this case, Svelte components into your pilot, it of course isn't code that you should write. But what you can do is, and that's something that was actually already possible beforehand, but now we made it a little bit easier, is that you just install the converter plugin that you usually would, well, install and use from your app shell in your pilot. Now, in this case, we install Piral Svelte, and then refer to a sub module called convert, and that's all. So convert comes with a helper method called from Svelte here. And if you know how it would look like if you would have installed Piral Svelte in the app shell, you would know that it just sits on app, but in this case, it's just a free function. So we can always just import now this free function anywhere. In this case, of course, in our root module of the pilot, and we get Svelte support. I mean, not so far. If you know Svelte, Svelte is very compile time driven, so you need a compiler for supporting tile.svelte. That compiler is actually called Svelte itself. And if you're using Webpack, what we're doing here, you also need a loader. So I installed a couple more things. I installed Svelte, loader. That's nothing Piral specific. You would need to do that for any Svelte application, right? So that's just the way Svelte works. And the only thing that we did here, we used now the functional approach, and we're just overriding the config, the standard config that the pilot uses. And we were actually providing things like a Svelte extension, additional main fields. Well, all of these things, they're not secret. They're just in the README of the Svelte loader. So we're just following the README of the Svelte loader. And the result is, if we are starting this, well, let's do that. That suddenly a Svelte is there and is working. So what do we expect here? Again, we're just using it in a tile, and this tile pretty much just has a counter. And yeah, we can increment, we can decrement, and it would just work as it should. So let's see if it's already there. This should be working. Let's see. There we go. So we see, welcome to the Piral sample app. Well, that's the same thing. That's our emulator, right? So that works. And now we have these two tiles. And I can, of course, just remove one of the tiles. Let's maybe remove the one that we don't need. So we now only have the Svelte one. And we could even say, let's make that maybe larger. So now it's larger, and it just works, right? It's Svelte, and it's fully integrated. And all the converters that we have out there, they can be used like that. So you can always install them in your pilot, and you can then use these converters, which is quite nice because that makes you fully independent of the app shell. And if you want to use some custom framework, yeah, just go ahead. And all the heavy lifting is done there for you. All right. Good. That brings us already to the last one, except of course if you have any question to these converters. But otherwise, I would say they're now maybe difficult. It's also 24. Yeah, let's open VS Code. So this is our sample for using React Native with Piral that we created back then when we added the proof of concept for using React Native with Piral. In a nutshell, it's just a standard scaffolding project using React Native for Windows. And likewise, we can now start this using, for instance, npx React Native run Windows. You could, in theory, of course, use any kind of target if you have a proper emulator installed for the respective platform. So, of course, iOS is not possible here, but if you would have a Mac, you could run it with an iPhone simulator. Likewise, if you have installed an Android emulator, you could also run it for Android. Okay, so that will now take a little bit of time. While that is, actually, it's rather fast today, so good. So let's give it maybe a little bit of time while I explain what's in there. We didn't touch so much these files, but maybe the most interesting one is the index.js. So that's the entry point, and that one now calls render instance from Piral Native. Of course, you know, render instance is just, let's say, a fancy wrapper. It calls underneath a create instance from Piral core, and then it calls the platform specific render method. So for instance, for the web, that's from React DOM, the render function. For React Native, it's the respective rendering function. And it hands over just the rendered Piral component, and that's all. In the React Native way, we also supply the app name and yeah, then already the arguments for creating the instance. So you need again the request pilets, and then you can do whatever, like for instance, setting something in your state. This is quite important that we redefine now how routing is, for instance, done. So here we have a small demo just showing that routing just works as on the web. So we can have a route for the homepage and a route for a sample page. And we have here two respective pages. So one just saying, let's go to the secondary route, and the other one just saying, let's go to the homepage. And that's it. So they are linked to each other, let's say. Right, then the other thing is we have a layout that just comes now from the app component. And what you can see is we are just using React Native components here, of course. I mean, that's the one thing you always need to think about. You can't use diff or something because, yeah, these are not defined now in the native space. So you need to use the components as defined from React Native. Or, of course, your own custom components if you wrote some. All right. This is also not a surprise. So we define our layout and our children, which is the content of the page. There should be then rendered in this view here with the style that we just passed over here. All the style, etc. That was all given. There's nothing custom here. It's just from the scaffolding. Okay, so yeah, that started. That's a React Native application, and now, of course, this is routing just as a very simple demonstration. And I could, of course, now go there and change various things. But yeah, that's just Piral now running in React Native. What are the gotchas? The most important one is, of course, what kind of pilets you use. Because if you're using version 1 pilets, then this includes a script tag. And yeah, we are not in a document, a web document, so you shouldn't do that, which means pilets for running in a React Native, they need to be version 0 pilets, which you can define via the schema version command line flag on building them. But that's something you should keep in mind here. Of course, it's just an empty feed, so there will nothing come out. And I don't have a feed where we have pilets in there that have been made for React Native, because again, if a pilot, as a component like diff something, then this will break for sure, right? Because you should only use React Native components in your pilot then. But besides that, I guess there are not many gotchas. I don't think so. Most of these are maybe with the code gen here. So I guess the Metro, which is the bundler used here in this scaffolding, well, first of all, is of course not as nice as Webpack from the extensibility point of view, but second of all, shouldn't regard our code gen file. But actually, Piral is prepared for that. And if you look at Piral core, for instance, there is no code gen anymore. There's the .native.js, which is also one of the packages that is directly resolved. And yeah, that will essentially be a stop for React Native. Otherwise, it would try to read the code gen file. That one doesn't make much sense for React Native, and so it will just throw an error and it will not work. But besides that, I actually think this is still the file as it was originally there after scaffolding, so there shouldn't be any surprising change. Right. Okay, so that's how React Native works. We publish that also in our Piral samples organization on GitHub. So you have there a sample called Piral Native sample. It contains all this code. And yeah, we didn't write much documentation, but yeah, always happy to get some comments and maybe to work on refining this. Again, it has, from our perspective, a proof of concept status. At this point in time, we didn't invest too much in React Native, even though we think it might be an interesting alternative. And yeah, especially when you consider, and in theory you can do that, you could create a whole micro-frontend solution that works for the web, that then uses native web components, but also works for mobile, really giving you native mobile or using native mobile components. And essentially how you would do that is via a component library that in your web micro front-end app shell yeah, is pinned down to a web version of the component library. And in your native version, it would just point to a native version of that component library. I mean, essentially using then things like coming from React Native as base components like Vue, etc. Whereas the web version would really use div and spawns and maybe other styles, of course, too. But that way you could really abstract that fully away and get a really nice user experience out at the end. Right, so that's all I had to say. If there are now some questions, then happy to take them, or any comments, remarks. If anything is unclear. All right, so I hope that this was useful. If not, then yeah, also comment, please. But if you think that this is a nice step forward, then yeah, just let us know. And otherwise, I would say let's hear each other next week. I'll try to make an agenda again. Again, most important thing next week will be the demo about the bundled script, which will be a quite nice thing. Yeah. Happy to hear you guys next week then.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. Good content, good progress, and yeah, have a great day.
You too.
Yep,
Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much for explanation. Helped me
You're
a lot.
welcome.